Dear ladies and gentlemen, дорогі українці, it's already episode number 12 in our series of conversation of Ukrainian and foreign intellectuals, experts in different fields about different aspects of Russia's war against Ukraine. For you, our listeners who are keen to learn more, think deeper, and hear from the original sources. Це вже 12-та серія у нашій серії розмов між українською і зарубіжною інтелігенцією експертів у різних галузях про різні аспекти війни Росії проти України. Для вас, наші слухачі, які прагнуть дізнатися більше, мислити глибше та чути з перших джерел. This is a project of Pan-Ukraine, and I want to remind you that its entire team stays in Ukraine, fighting their battle for their lives and for the freedom of expression. The one for dignity they already won. Це проєкт Пан-Україна, і ви вже знаєте, що вся його команда залишається в Україні та веде боротьбу за своє життя та свободу слова. Оту за гідність вони вже перемогли. The project is co-hosted by Pan International, which has continued to provide a platform for freedom of expression for those currently under the highest risk. We work under the Pan International Charter. Співорганізатором проєкту є Міжнародний ПЕН, який продовжує надавати платформу для свободи вираження слова для тих, хто перебуває в групі найвищого ризику. Ми дотримуємося хартії Міжнародного ПЕН. Our partners for today are traditional Pan America, the Ukrainian Institute, the Ukrainian Institute London, Ukraine World, Old Lion Publisher House, the Harvard University Ukrainian Research Institute, and the Harriman Institute at Columbia University. We are streaming today's event to all partners' Facebook pages. Сьогодні нашими партнерами є традиційно Pan America, Український інститут Лондона, Ukrainian World, видавництво Старого Лева, Український науково-дослідний інститут Гарвардського університету та інститут Гаррімана при Колумбійському університеті. Ми транслюємо сьогоднішню подію на усі партнерські сторінки у Facebook. Захід відбуватиметься англійською мовою. And I will switch into English to introduce our guests for today. Both of our today's guests have a huge experience in media and writing nonfiction, together with gathering information for it. And none of them used to avoid any complicated and harsh issues. So it's going to be a strong conversation. And our viewers and listeners, please remember that you are welcome to share thoughts and questions in comments during our event. Our Ukrainian guest is Oleksandr Mykhed, writer, curator of art projects, and literary scholar. Oleksandr moved after his home in Kyiv Oblast was destroyed by Russians in the first days of this war. But he stays in Ukraine. He's very well known with the tools of creating media reality, researched and explained to us and to himself Ukrainian Donbass after Russia started war in 2014. And I assume that some of these pieces of puzzle might be used in our dialogue to comprehend current war, as well as today's voluntary experience. And Oleksandr will hold his dialogue with Witold Szabłowski, an award-winning Polish journalist and reporter who lived and studied for years in Turkey, and much of his journalism has engaged with the Turkish issues. At age 25, he became the youngest reporter at the Polish daily newspaper Gazeta Wyborcza, where he covered international stories in countries including Cuba, South Africa, and Iceland. Witold works with themes like immigrants, possibility or impossibility of forgiveness. We were just talking about it with Dr. Edith Egger yesterday. Reconciliation, researched and reconstructed the experience of life in Soviet reality. Studied the lives of dictators. Sounds very promising, isn't it? Oleksandr, Witold, stage is yours.
Thank you, Olha. Дуже дякую. Дуже рад тебе бачити, Сашко, і дуже дякую за цю можливість. I'm really glad that Pan International and Pan Ukraine and Harvard University, the Ukrainian Studies of Harvard University, and my publisher, Stary Lev, gave us this platform, this opportunity. I'm really happy to see you in good health and good shape. And I want to start from the moment. I want to ask you about the very first moments of the war, how the war began for you.
Uh, Chesh, Witold, thanks a lot, Pen, for having me. That's a huge honor to talk to you because I'm a huge fan of your books, and I hope I learned a lot from them, and I'm really curious to talk to you about
Thank
all
you.
this stuff.
Thank you.
The war started just from the very first day. We experienced it like in a full scale, because me and my wife, I have to learn to talk about our house in the past tense. We had our townhouse in 30 kilometers from Kiev. It's in Hostomel. So the war started on 24th of February at 8 a.m. We heard the first helicopters, and they bombed the Hostomel airport, which became a turning point, some really interesting point for these occupants just from the first morning. And somewhere around 10 a.m. I called my mom. She and my dad, they had their apartment in Bucha, which is in 10 minutes driving by car from our townhouse, and her windows, they're just looking at the Hostomel airport. So she actually saw how they tried to conquer this, and she actually saw the 13 helicopters that were bombing, and she just saw that from her balcony, from the first row. So that was the experience of the first hours. And before the war, we had our plan A, plan B, plan C. We understood that something gonna happen. So we had our emergency bag. We had the plan A. What will happen if they start to invade more in Donbass? We had the plan for if they will start from the north, but the worst plan, the plan C, or how you plan Z, or how you call it now, that was that they will appear in Kiev, and we never expected that's going to happen just in one day. They will be everywhere. So as we had our emergency bag, and we left our house at 5 p.m. on 24th of February from Hostomel. Our neighbor, our saving angel, he helped us, me and my wife and our dog Lisa, to escape. So we appeared in the morning on 25th of February, we appeared in Chernivtsi. In this story, there is the other side, the worst side. Those are actually two of them, because around 40-50 residents of our townhouses complex in Hostomel, they stayed in this hell for 2.5 weeks. So they experienced this Kadyrov guys appearing in front of their doors. They experienced with the rifles, these army men, they just put the rifle on women and said to them, to me, and on their knees, to leave their house. Who are you to put people on knees to leave their house? So that happens throughout these 2 weeks. On the other hand, the worst part is that we haven't found the right words to convince my parents to leave their Bucha apartment, and they were ready to stay as long as it's possible, and they had no doubt that they supposed to leave to stay at their apartment. So my parents stayed in hell of Bucha around 16 days, and being in the improvised bomb shelter. And both my parents, they are professors of literature. So the first time I talked to my dad after they escaped through the phone, my dad told me, do you remember the words of Varlam Shalamov, who is this famous Soviet Russian writer who wrote 6 books of Kalimsky short stories writing about Gulag system and that. So my dad, the first words that he said to me was like, do you remember Varlam Shalamov, who said that no human is supposed to live through the concentration camp experience? And he said the same, that nobody should ever experience this bombing and being in the first row of the this theater of war. and nobody's supposed to experience that when they are like 70 years old. So they escaped after 2 weeks of bombing. They are in Chernivtsi right now, and everything they have to this moment, like renowned literary scholars to professors, they have only the old Ford car, and they had their black cat, but black cat died after the months of this war. So, and I saw a lot of posts on my Facebook feed and Instagram feed that was some kind of mark for the first months of war, that animals started to die. And that's something symbolical about this war, because this cat survived 16 days of bombing and a huge and long road to Chernivtsi, and then this cat could not survive the afterlife. And that's just I understand that on the scale of Mariupol, in the scale of Chernihiv and Irpin, Bucha, all these heartbreaking stories. The story about the cat is not something so strong, but for me, that's a symbol that what has happened with us throughout this month.
And what happened to your parents' house or apartment in Bucha?
Ukrainian army took that as the position to shoot the enemies. That was the beginning of the story. So they stayed by just a random. My parents, they stayed for around 3-5 days. They stayed just with the random people they didn't know. Like they tried to escape and to wait until the bombing goes in Bucha. And then just a random guy appeared and he said, like, why are you here? Come to our place. And they stayed there. And we don't know what actually is now happening in Bucha with their apartment. And for sure, they're looters. For sure, they're barbarians. For sure, they're Russian army still. And we could see a lot of pictures from Irpin, from Bucha, from Hostomel, how this Nazi occupants, how they try to bring like the simplest thing of our daily life. I don't know, like sneakers, like Nutella or laptops. They're just grabbing everything they could see. You could see pictures that they're putting the carpets. Like, who are you to put the carpet on your tank? And how do you think you will take it to your Buryatia or to your Chechnya? You will take your Ukrainian carpet with yourself. And that's like what's happening. It's not about this glory of Russian army or the saving Ukrainian people. It's about like taking our shoes, taking our underpants, like underwears. We have a huge archive of this, I don't know how you call it in English, like the talks when the Russian soldiers, they call to their families and they are talking like to their wives and to their kids, and they say like, oh, you should have seen how these Ukrainians live. This is a nice renovation, or this was a really nice family, but I took like a coat to you, I took vitamins for you. And that's the scale of their understanding.
That's amazing, because for the last book I wrote, it's called Russia through the kitchen door, but it's a tricky title because it's rather about how Russia is using its kitchen and cuisines to build its empire and how it's trying to conquer other countries. So you can read about Holodomor, about Chernobyl, about the war in Afghanistan, and that was amazing because what you're talking about reminds me so much the stories from the Afghan war, from when the soldiers from Soviet Union, which was such a proud country with so many great, philosophers and so rich, and the country number 2, or as they thought, number 1 in the world, and then they went to the peasant country of Afghanistan that they had no respect for, and suddenly they realized that in Afghanistan, you can buy a video, or you can buy a TV, or you can buy trousers, which you cannot buy in Soviet Union, in the glorious Soviet Union. And they had a culture shock. Like all the things they grew up with, all the things they were so sure of. Like they are such a great country, and now the simple soldiers, as you say, some probably from Chechnya, some from Buryatia, but some from Russia, they understood that they are living in a horrible place, that they are living, that even the peasants of Afghanistan have better life than they have in the Soviet Union. So I think that now they have similar culture shock. Would you agree with this?
Yeah, absolutely. Like we could hear that from their phone calling, and they were shocked with this. We have this program of decentralization that started after Maidan, that the budget of the local communities stays in these local communities. So these small villages, they are developing with the light, with the door, with the roads, and etc., with the sports centers. So they were really shocked. And even if they could see what the Irpin or Bucha looks like, it's really amazing towns with great infrastructure. And then you just appear there, and this is just aims, just targets that just coordinates to bomb on that. But I'd like to ask you about this, the last your book, the book that you've mentioned about the Russian kitchen, and the stuff that I'm really curious is the cultural, I don't know, activists, and what I'm trying to say in the international media, and what I'm actually trying to do with my writings and etc. I'm trying to say that we need a huge cancel of the Russian culture. We need that for like, I don't know, like 80 years, 100 of years. We need to cancel this on the all levels, starting with the exhibitions, with the film directors, with the movie productions, with the translations of the Russian classics. And please, no more Dostoevsky books until this war stops, and we will have our reparations for that. What's your idea about that?
Yeah, definitely. I'm not prepared to discuss about Dostoevsky because I'm still like I don't know what to tell about this, but I'm sure that this process for me seems to be a bit deeper. And I think, you know, Germany after World War II, they had this so-called denazification process when they really had to learn at schools what Germans and the Nazis did during World War II. And nothing like this has never happened in Russia. And, you know, whenever I was in Moscow, and I've been there more than 20 times, and each time I was it's such a awkward feeling when you had the mass murder in his grave in the center of the capital of the country. So what a country can you build up on this coffin? What a country can you build, you know, upon the mass murder? Which, and like generally in Russia, they're you know, they look at many things with one eye closed, but not at Lenin. Like when you go to Lenin's tomb, you have to be damn serious. You have to. It's like in a church. It's like in
the same story that there is this story that you've mentioned in Dancing Bears with the Stalin Gori museum. Is there something sacred figure there?
Yeah, and you just have to respect the guy. And what a country can you build if you don't talk honestly about your past? So I think what Russia definitely needs, and when Ukraine wins the war, and I'm sure you will win this war, I think when Putin will be in Hague, hopefully they will let him go to Hague. They will not poison him before. I think this is what should happen to Russia. I think they should have few decades when they will know, when in their school programs, they will learn true about who Stalin was, who Lenin was, about Soviet Union, about Putin, and about all the wars that he began and their leaders began. So I think definitely I agree with you that, but as I said about Germany, that they had the denazification, they should have the Leninization, should I say, the Stalinization, the communization, whatever they, yeah, all the Ds, yeah. So it should be 5D program, and at the end, the Deputinization program at schools.
Yeah. And if we'll talk about Putin and his figure, you've researched on different dictators like Idi Amin, Fidel Castro, Saddam Hussein, Pol Pot in your book, How to Feed a Dictator. And when you look at the figure of Putin, who is he? Who is Mr. Putin? Is he a classical dictator or is something particular about him?
Yeah, classical, because all the dictators at some point they lose the contact with their reality, because firstly they eliminate all the people that don't clap. They are so self-confident, they do everything best, so they don't like people who not agree with them, and each of the dictators has done that or did that in the past. Like it's the case of Saddam Hussein, who killed all his friends and ministers who didn't clap during his speeches or didn't agree with his decisions. And it was the same for Idi Amin. So like each dictator has the moments when he has to centralize his power. So until this moment, it's possible to talk or even persuade some things to them. But then they have the moment when all the power is in their hands. And that's the most dangerous moment for all the dictators, because that's the moment when they start making mistakes. And I think Putin, his first mistake was that there is no really people who could tell him the truth around him. Like he totally, like if you try to tell truth, you see these meetings. By the way, it's so much different, like what your president is doing, just talking with his ministers, like, you know, like a group of friends, and Putin in this absurd long table, you know, and it's so many memes about this table. And I think each dictator has this moment when he just cuts off all the people that could tell him the truth, and that's the moment when he starts making mistakes. And I think he's exactly in this moment. And what's next? Each case is different, but that could be coup d'etat. That's the case of Idi Amin. That could be war and hanging. That's the case of Saddam Hussein. It could be hug, like in the case of Slobodan Milosevic. But I think generally, I wrote the book about Russia through the kitchen door, and I know that in Russia, their favorite way of dealing with people they don't want to be in power anymore is poisoning. So this is what I would expect. Like if I was Putin, the first thing I would check every day if in the kitchen there is the guy I know, because for example, that's how the war in Afghanistan began, that they changed the chefs that were serving to the president of Afghanistan. And he didn't realize, like he trusted to the Russians so much, but that was the sign that they are planning to poison him. So if I was Putin, firstly, I would check every morning who's in the kitchen. Is it the guy I know? Is it the guy I trust? And secondly, I would really check every meal, every cup of tea, everything I'm taking, even close to my mouth.
And that's why you have to have your chef's huge table to be so far from everybody. Yeah.
I think it's, you know, they said it's because of COVID, but I think he's probably even afraid that they might attack him, I don't know, with some chemicals. You heard the story about the two Ukrainian negotiators and Abramovich, that they had been poisoned by some chemicals. Do you know more about this story? Could you tell?
No, that's I'm really shocked that Abramovich is in this group of negotiators. Like, why would
He was in Poland.
Abramovich appear there?
He had some secret meeting with Joe Biden in Poland. Nobody knows what did they really talk about, but he's like sort of Putin's messenger. Like Putin's trying.
He could not sell Chelsea football club, so why would he participate in such huge war negotiations? That's pretty stupid. And in terms of dictators, like how often they look in the past? Because like the whole ideology of Putin is based on looking in the past. It's not about future. It's like about this another Lenin mummy or something like zombie state. And is this the typical story with dictators, like no future for their countries?
Sometimes, yes. Generally, they need to explain people why the power belongs to them, and usually they look for some good explanation that could wake some emotions up. And usually you find these sort of things in the history. That's why dictators love history, especially that many people, they don't know history well. They just know some facts, and but then you can wrap these facts into your propaganda and sell it to the crowds. And that's what they usually do. Like the good example of that is Pol Pot, like the mass murderer from Cambodia. And he was trying to resell the ideology of the great Khmer country that existed in 12th or 13th century, and it had nothing in common with Cambodia that he took power in, but it was a good explanation for people. There are links between us and the old good Khmers, and that's why we should make the revolution and kill people to make Cambodia great again.
That's why we have, make Khmers great again. Yeah.
I think dictatorships, they start from renewing things. Like you cannot just take the country and rule it. You just have to make something great again. You have to make Russia great again, make America great again. Whenever you have a crazy person coming to power, he's not trying to reform. He's trying to do a revolution. And I think generally, from the Russian point of view, like I really wish they had a leader that can reform a country, that could stop something they've been doing from Peter the Great times. Like they keep building the empire, they cannot stop. Their own people are starving. Their own people are living in horrible conditions. They are treating their own, like what you see in the Ukrainian war. They are treating their own people like worse than people in West treat their dogs. Like they have no respect for the dead soldiers, but they are so much forced to build this empire. And I really wish Russia one day could stop and just focus on themselves. They have enough territory, they have enough people, they have enough natural resources to be happy. And if one day they really decide to use this potential, not for oligarchs and for this sort of KGB / oligarch mafia and for building this so-called empire, but for its own people, it would be such a great thing for the whole world and for Russians.
Yeah, and here is the place to ask about the good Russians. Is there a place now in the world media for voices of good Russians? And what's your opinion about that?
Are you asking me about Marina Ovsyannikova?
That's a huge example of that. Yeah, because you've made a piece about her recently for Polish
You
media,
know,
as far as I
I
know.
mean, whenever people ask me about the good Russians, I tell them this is not the time about judge who's good in Russia, who's bad. This is the time to support Ukraine, support Mariupol. This is the time to talk and to record everything what's possible about the Russian war crimes in Ukraine. And then when the war is over and Putin is in Hague or in the cemetery, then we can talk about these kind of things. But generally, of course, from the first day, I didn't trust that Marina Ovsyannikova could be real. But that's another topic.
Yeah, yeah.
And can you tell me a little bit of what are you doing? Like, what happened to you when, like, firstly, I know that your house was it bombed, or what happened to your house? Maybe that's the question I want to ask. And where and when did you move later? Where did you move later?
We've been in Chernivtsi just from the second day of war, and around the 4th of March we got the message from our neighbor who sent us the picture of our townhouse, and it has just a huge I don't know, it was some kind of mina. I don't know how it's in English. So it kind of mine, the kind of mine or something. So it just smashed like this, like the cart house. And you could see, then my neighbor, he joked like, I still has your key from your front door. And I said, like, if this still be like this, you don't need the key from the front door. You just come in and that's it. That's how it works. You don't need it. It's no fancy. It has no, it has nothing. It's just, so there are, like, I am a writer without no archive. I'm a person without no physical memory. I am a guy with no childhood photos. I don't have photos of my parents. That's what happened. I don't have my library. I don't have my office where I actually work in. It's not the for internally displaced person, this is just a typical story, but that's the type of the stuff that you feel that everything starts from the scratch. And as we joke here, the war is the best cure from the middle life crisis. So you just start everything from the beginning. You're not in the somewhere in the mid of your career. You're not in the mid of your life. You just start everything. You just have to start everything from the beginning. And it works with the person of the mid age as me, but it's really cruel in terms of my parents, for example, who are 70 years old and they had their new apartment. They haven't lived in that for like 1 year. It's like 10 months or 9 months that they've spent in a new apartment that they really loved. And again, they don't have their archive, they don't have their library that they gathered through their life. And still, there's another joke about our libraries, because we understand that if the house is still not under fire or something, there is nobody who would be interested in these books. Like the books of Ukrainian poets from 1950s or Ukrainian novelists from 1960s, the first published books. So I really hope that this is not the point of interest for Russian or Ukrainian looters who just don't understand the value of books or the archive. And that's probably it might be saved, but nobody knows.
And may I ask you about, after those 16 days you said that your parents had spent in Bucha, how did you manage to take them from there to Chernivtsi? Like, is it possible to evacuate people from Bucha?
That was a long process, and I guess that's some kind of evangelical story, because as I mentioned, the Varlam Shalom of words that nobody needs that, because you see only devastation, you see the worst side of the human nature. But on the other hand, their experience was meeting just amazing angel people who helped them. As I mentioned, the family that they stayed with for 5 days altogether. Then there was a guy who there was this green corridor from Bucha, and they tried to escape this for 2 or 3 days. It was not from the first day. They tried to be there, and then they started shooting people. So they closed the corridor. And the next day they tried to go there, but there was too many people, and then they had to wait for another corridor. So they were lucky to escape on their car. And in Kiev, there was a guy who sit in their car and who served as a driver, and he took my parents in their car throughout Ukraine to Chernivtsi. So this was the chain of lucky moments, happy moments, and the evangelical helpfulness of people. Why I'm telling this? Because we did this through the Protestant community, as my wife has. She is a part of that, and she has a lot of friends there. So that was a part of the serve to people, and that's how it happened and how they appeared here. So this is just, as a researcher, I've always read books about the worst side of humanity, and that's the stuff that I try to research in my own books. But that's totally different when you see this not as a researcher, but the actual person in this, and how it works. And I'm not sure that the experience is the right word for the events that we are going through. This is just something new, and me and my wife, we talked to each other that we don't feel like, we don't have any feelings about the destroyed house. We don't have any feelings about what's happening now. We have to work as much concentrated to be helpful, to be useful for our country and for our victory as well. And this is the idea that I had, that I don't want to reflect the experience or experience like this. I don't want to reflect what has happened, because it's not useful right now. It's just the part of new personality or new version of us that appears through this.
This is very touching. This is very touching what you say. And this is amazing, because I think I have a feeling that somehow, of course, we are in a completely different situation here in Poland, but I think that, you know, that about 2 million people from Ukraine came to Poland, and nobody lives, very few people, and usually it's just 1 or 2 nights, people that live in some sort of big halls, because most of those people are taken by Polish people to their homes. And I think naturally we felt the same way, that we forgot our lives from before the war started. Now it's a completely different situation. I think naturally many people cope with that, and this is amazing.
This is the stuff that I've been thinking these last days, that each memory that would appear in my mind, and for example, we had the 5th anniversary with my wife, or I finished a new book or we had a really nice trip to France. And then to each memory, you should add words, and then the war started. And that's the turning point, of the whole life. And you realize this from the first day, it totally changes your view on your past. It totally changes your memories. And I find myself really, that's hard for me to try to think about past, because this everything belongs not to the comfort zone. This is not about being happy. This is something that was in totally different reality. And then war started. And I totally agree with you, for those activists from Poland or Czech Republic or Romania or other countries, those who participate in this helping refugees and hosting them and being in the front line of this refugee crisis, I'm sure they have changed their life. That's yeah.
Of course, it's completely different situation because we are just trying to help, and
Yeah.
you literally have the war, like you have your house destroyed. So it's completely different. But I think that in this region, we naturally know what the war means, that you don't have to explain people. For example, my observation as a writer was that I became very, I'm missing a word, but I used much less words, especially when I talk to my friends from Ukraine. That's usually I'm quite talkative, and I like jokes, anecdotes, etc. But since the war began, I changed my way of talking. And I think we have something in DNA in this region that we just there is this action reaction process that the war starts and naturally you know how to behave. So I think it's like we know that it's not only Ukrainian war. I think in Poland we can feel it, that Ukraine is the first country that was attacked, but actually all of us, it's for all of us, that Putin just attacked firstly former USSR empire, but secondly he attacked the whole West.
Yeah, and there is this another idea that I'm thinking about, the idea of synchronization, like the experience that people have all at the same time. And when the war started in eastern part of Ukraine in 2014, there was this localized experience, like we tried to help, we tried to do our best, we tried to reflect, we tried to research, we tried to talk, we tried to help and be useful. But that was the region that experienced this. And now on the full scale war, we are experiencing this simultaneously in different parts of Ukraine. And this understanding that you are talking about, that this is the war for other countries, this is again about the experience of that, because this is about common language, this is about common experience that we are going through. And that's really touching is not the right word, but this is about having even the common vocabulary, because in the army slang or in the army sphere, we usually, there is this plus, like you've got the information, you just put plus and that's it. And you could see how many pluses we've got through this months in our daily communication. And the stuff that is useful for the army talk, for army discourse, you'll see that it's expanding to the larger scale, to the whole community. And then, as you've said, trying to be not talkative, trying to be just put your energy not in talking, put your energy in something for doing that.
Thank you. I was waiting for a pause to introduce. I'm almost missed our deadline just listening to you guys. Thank you for that. I have a question from our listeners, and it's both to you. It's addressed both to you, basically. What do you think of this trend we are seeing when discussing this war, what is called West-splaining? What do you think about the West evaluating the situation slightly different, let's say, than Ukraine and also Poland, probably? I know that's a tricky question.
Yeah, I don't feel it that much, because I think that with Ukraine, we have very similar perspective for the whole war. And as I said before, we quite naturally understand what does it mean when Russia attacks. But I definitely, there is something more in the West than Poland. And I think the case that we just very quickly discuss the case of Marina Ovsyannikova. She's a product for the West, for the Western TV interview, for the Western TV stations. This is the perfect. She's a perfect product for the fairy tale about the good Russians that are against the war and are protesting, but are hurt by the sanctions, etc. So I think the more to the West, the less people understand how is it to live in the Russia's shadow.
Yeah, and they try to make this frame of the dialogue between the artists, and I could imagine for next 10 years, 20 years, that they will put us together on panel discussions and, hey, you're intellectuals, you have to be like peaceful doves or something, you have to find the intellectual dialogue with no emotions and that. But actually, I'm sick and tired with their attempts of making this, and I see how they will try to make this throughout the next decades, putting us together for this so-called dialogue. But there is no possibility for the dialogue when we are in the war, and if there won't be any denazification, or as Witold said, 5D, those nazifications that they're supposed to go through, and only through that option. It's not the time right now, and it won't be the time for a dialogue until that process happens to the whole society, to all communities on all levels of Russia.
But is
Actually,
it ever possible?
Actually, when I'm listening to Sashko, I think that this is the very good moment to really end World War II. Like, thanks to Ukrainian army, which is doing such a great job, we really have a chance to finish the second dictatorship that wasn't ended when the World War II ended. So maybe, hopefully, maybe that's a good moment. I think Putin made a horrible mistake. Hopefully, we will at the end of the day, maybe his power will fall. I really hope, and I really think it's possible, and it might change Russia dramatically and very deeply. I really hope it's gonna happen.
Thank you. So the only global changes are the necessary condition for any possibility to take a dialogue. This is what our speakers say. I really appreciate your perspective on existential and communicational changes and culture shock and values. And this culture shock is not probably only what some Soviet or Russian soldiers had invading Afghanistan or now Ukraine, but what the whole world facing watching those war crimes right now. Thank you, Sashko, for your frontline experience, your courage, and the way how you are sharing those facts on the war reality. I'm extremely sorry about your house and happy for your family is safe now. Thank you, Witold, for your perspective on dictators and their mentality and behavioral patterns and those thoughtful questions, because I think that there are a lot of things to be reworked and rethought. And those, we probably have no answers, but only opening the questions, and what we all can take from those conversations is usually deeper understanding and some answers about what can I do to help Ukraine. And I would like to ask you both, if you can say, what can intellectual do to help Ukraine today? Sashko?
Okay. I guess this we have to specify in terms of either this is Ukrainian context or is this the world context. But the main idea for the world context, and as I'm talking in English and I'm trying to reach the wider audience, the first is we understand that you are tired. You, the world viewers, the intellectuals from wider world, you are tired with this war. and you have a lot of different crises all over the globe, and you have these problems in your own countries, and there is no place for such a long marathon of empathy to the country that's struggling to win the war against Russians. But please don't forget about us. The time when you feel that you are tired of this Russian-Ukrainian war, please remember this moment. Then I ask you to help us, to be with us. Because as long as you're interested, as long as you are talking about this war, as long as you are sharing either this your thoughts, either this official information from Ukrainian sources, or through the Ukrainian intellectuals, writers, artists, or just people sharing their experience of war, because there are a lot of posts and texts all over the globe in English or in other languages that we try to share. So please be the part of that, and please don't get tired of this, because this is a really long story. We are just in the 33rd day of war, and it's just the small part of a long process, and we need your support, your empathy, and your interest, and your readiness to be helpful, because this is the first months when everybody helped us financially. But what's going to be in 5 months, in 10 months, and we will need your financial support as well. And so to be on our way for freedom and for our common victory.
Thank you so much. Do you have anything to add, Witold?
Yeah, firstly, I want to say that from Polish perspective, what we did as a society is we just created a safe place for Ukrainian for people from Ukraine to come and stay for as long as it's needed. And I must say, I'm really proud of Poles and Ukrainians, because I know I've observed that as an author of a book about the Polish-Ukrainian massacres during World War II. I observed in the first row how Russia is trying to make us fight with Ukrainians and Ukrainians fight with us. And I'm really proud for both nations, for Poles and Ukrainians, that we opened the borders to over 2 million. It's already 2.5 million people came, and there is no clashes, no fights, and only the Russian trolls in the internet. They are trying to divide us, and we are not letting them do that. So this is the first thing. We just created the safe space for people escaping from the conflict, from the war zone, just to make it possible for Ukrainian army to fight with the enemy, with our common enemy. And as I don't like the word intellectual, but let's say as a writer, I'm doing, because I'm a person who has traveled to Ukraine so many times, dozens of times, much less to Russia, but I've been there, and I think I understand a bit more than other people. So I'm just trying to explain to people like what's happening, because people sometimes they just don't understand things that some things in Russian history they repeat, that Russians don't learn from their mistakes. So knowing history, you can understand a little bit of what's happening and of what might happen in the future. And this is what I'm trying to do. Like my Facebook now is like my private war newspaper, when I explain to people what's happening in Ukraine, and when I'm trying to get a closer or deeper look into the war.
Thank you. So what can I do today to help Ukraine? Today I would say fight like Ukrainian, care like Polish, don't get tired, and stay together. We are grateful to our partners for today's event: Pan America, the Ukrainian Institute London, Ukraine World, the Old Lion Publisher House and the Harvard University Ukrainian Research Institute and Harriman Institute at Columbia University, and for the cross-streaming service and all the partners' pages. Gratitude, of course, to PEN Ukraine, which continues to stand on the front lines in the name of freedom and truth. PEN International is proud to be a platform that supports freedom of expression. We don't necessarily agree with each word said, but this is how freedom of expression works. Please follow our page and our dialogues to be informed about further events over this and next weeks. The next episode will be broadcast on Friday, 1st of April at 5 p.m. Kyiv time, 3 p.m. London time. Our speakers will be Katarina Michalitsina, Ukrainian poetess, children writer, translator, and editor, and Michael Katakis, writer, photographer, fellow of the Royal Geographical Society and manager of Ernest Hemingway Literary Estate. Thank you one more time, our great speakers. Thank you, Poland. Thank you, our viewers. Follow our dialogues on Word, spread the word, and stay with Ukraine. This is our shared responsibility today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.